So it's our pleasure because your works are on my bookshelves in our family's household. We have an 11-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son, and so we've had your books in our house for a little while now. And I'm very excited to get my hands on a copy of The Family I'm In. Talk to us about why you chose to focus this particular book on this exploration of Black boys and fatherhoods and our notions of manhood in this society.
Well, you know what? I've been writing for boys as well as girls. People think about me as only a girl writer, right?
You've
I
been
started off,
typecast.
yeah, I started off with The Skin I'm In 25 years ago. This is the end cap to that, The Skin I'm In, The Life I'm In, and now The Family I'm In. But I've written for and about boys for a long time. Bang was one of my novels with a
That's
boy, a male perspective. And then there was a collection of short stories called You Don't Even Know Me. When people would look at that jacket, they would see a boy with a hoodie on. And so they thought, okay, this is before all the other stuff happened. But it was. And so just wanted to tell stories about young Black boys, always had them front and center in all of
right.
my novels, even if there was a female on the jacket. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is no different. Reading news and seeing things on television about Black boys being more suicidal, boys in general being more isolated, not being able to talk and engage in relationships, not having enough groups and organizations for boys themselves. And so I thought I wanted to end my last book in this series with one of the boys from the first story, John, who people always said, did he like Malika? He was always teasing her. And so I want, they have to read the book to see that.
Yeah.
But
Oh, man. Go
but
ahead.
John, this is his story. He's like about 16 and a half now, and he desperately wants a girlfriend. He desperately wants to be kissed. He's a nice boy. And one of the quotes he says is, girls don't like nice boys. And I got that from I think it was a ninth grade football player in Texas many years ago, where I was there talking about a book that was primarily about girls and relationship with boys. And he came up to me and said, Miss, he was so handsome. Girls don't want nice boys. I never forgot that. And so I wanted that to be a part of that book. So he's a nice kid. He has this father who is really a community hero, right? He's a guy that puts the weight on his world and he wants to get jobs for everybody and he hands out money. But when it comes to his son, he would prefer he be a different kind of boy. Like John is a nerd and John does archery. He's the only boy in the book club for girls, right? And his dad would love it if he could come home for once and say, you know what, I beat somebody up, right? Or I scored all the points in basketball, but he doesn't even like basketball. And then you
Mm.
have his friend Caleb, also from the first book. Caleb has an amazing father who happens to be ill. And Caleb, in tribute to his father, says, you know what? I'm going to stand in his shoes the way he stood in them. So he gets a job that is probably overwhelming for somebody his age. He starts paying the bills and that sort of thing. Doesn't make his father feel great, but again, men hold a lot of things in that we don't know about, right? And so whereas John and Caleb can go to Caleb's father and emotionally unload, who does his father go to? It would be nice if he went to his mother, but she's not in the book. I mean,
Right,
like
right.
his wife, but she's not in the book. And so trying to look at that manhood and relationships with men and boys in a nuanced way,
And
not just one way.
that's so necessary now because one of the challenges of I think living in a society where black men exist is watching how limited the spaces for black men, black boys to experience the full range of emotions. It's a very small space, very small space. And I
Mhm.
think there are a lot of men who have sons who perhaps are a different type of boy than they envisioned their son being, who struggle with that, who don't have necessarily the words or the language to describe, I love you. And it's not that I'm disappointed in you, but you're different than what I expected. And I don't really know what to do with that because you're different sort of challenges my own understandings of what manhood looks like. And
Right.
it's not as though we have these prolific spaces where black men are able to, dialogue and discuss things. And I actually saw somebody on social media who said recently, that this is a black male identified person, and he says, yeah, my homie just called me, or I think he said my boy, he might not have said homie, I think that's one of my generation's words, and he was like, yeah, he called me and we walked to the park and we ended up talking, And it was the best conversation ever. And he said, I think if more men would just walk and talk, we might not have as many podcast bros. Like we wouldn't have people having their therapy needs aired out to the public, because that capacity for discussion, for discourse, for hearing each other and engaging in dialogue, talking about what you fear, what you're excited about. If you had some space to do that, that felt safe for you, you might not necessarily need to be on a podcast, Mike. That they were joking about it, but it really illuminated for me the challenges that Black men and Black boys must experience in this inability to be who they are, to show up in the full range of and the
Who they are.
spectrum of who they are. Talk to us. You mentioned this child in Texas who gave you that quote that sort of stuck with you. But what is it that you want Black boys and Black men to get out of engaging with the family I'm in?
Space,
Mm.
room to have a multitude of conversations. You talked about sort of the limited emotions sometimes in space they have. Well, you have John's father, who is the guy that believes, he's the breadwinner. He's the person that's going to save the world, but he's not going to say a lot of emotional things to you. But you have Caleb's father. That's who John goes to be open and have all the space in the world to have any kind of conversation that he wants to have about girls, about school, about his dad. And so I want Black boys and men and boys in general to have the space in the room to have whatever conversations they want to have around that text. I found with young people that I've had fathers call me up and say, I didn't know this about my daughter or my son until I read that book with them. And people will be surprised when you put the book in the hand of a child, what kinds of things that they discover about themselves and what kind of things you'll discover. And it's not always negative. John is very funny, and he says some things I think that natural boys, a lot of boys out there say about girls that some of us would say, now, wait a minute, you shouldn't say that. You need to correct that. I wanted him to have space to say that, because I think a lot of boys do, and you can't have conversations around it if you don't admit that there's a truth to what, not so much to what they're saying, that's their own opinion, but the fact that that kind of dialogue and conversation is had. So that's what I wanted to do. Space and room for maybe men and boys in churches or synagogues or wherever to sit down, read the book together, and sort of pick it apart. Where did she get it right? Where did she maybe not get it right? Why do boys behave like this? Why don't they have space and room to do this over here? And the space and room, that's why John is into archery, because I'm always trying to give Black boys and Black girls, in the context of most of my stories take place in the inner city because I was born there. I'm there a lot and I love it. And so I give them all kinds of means and outlets right within the space that they're in.
Mm. When I think about you'd mentioned some of the conversations that you want Black boys to have space to and men to be able to engage in. And because my oldest is a boy, I've had and he was our only child for about 6 years. So there's a huge gap between he and his younger sister. But I was able to observe differences. I obviously was born as a girl, raised as a girl, identify as a female human being. But it was interesting to me to see how he and his little friends would play and the conversations they would have. And there were many moments I can remember where I wanted to step in and correct the conversation because, well, that's sexist or that's inappropriate. And there were times when I would do that and I could just see sort of, oh God, here comes mom again. And almost this wall be erected between he and I, because every time it felt like I was going to be present, there was going to be some sort of critique or judgment of how he was showing up. And I was wrestling with, well, I don't want to raise a sexist. I don't want to raise this patriarchal man. I mean, his father is amazing. He's a very, he supports equal rights for women. He's, on the leading edge. I'm like, but I don't want to raise a whole little patriarch. And so for me, as a mom who's a little type A when it comes to certain things, I was very assertive in sort of dominating his conversation space. And then I remember, my husband at one point being like, hey, if he shuts down around you, to avoid you correcting what is said when he's communicating. Just don't be surprised when he stops communicating with you. And I'll tell you, Ms. Flake, that scared the crap out of me. That alone was enough to get me to reevaluate how I was showing up. But I still have some tensions with that. Talk to, even though the mom isn't present, talk to us about some of what you have been able to see in your research for the book and just your exploration of these topics over these past many decades about the ways in which we want to raise Black boys and some of these self-defeating behaviors that we might perpetuate or engage in that we think is helping us to raise Black boys, but might actually be serving more to shut them down and prevent them from being able to mature in a way that is really more appropriate for them.
You might need a psychologist for that.
Yes, indeed. Well,
I will-
thanks. Shout
but
out to my
here's
therapist
what I would
who's able
say.
to confirm.
No, but here's what I will say. For all of these years, it's been so often that people have said, okay, Black boys don't read, they won't read. And I can tell you for sure, they will read when they get a book that they're interested in.
Right.
And so I have a lot of Black boys that read my work. I have a lot of Black boys that show up and come up to me in schools and say things to me. Recently, a young boy, we were taking pictures, so it was a crowd of kids behind me. I hear this voice. He's like an eighth grader, seventh, eighth grader, and he says, Miss Flake, I am Malika. Malika is the dark skinned girl in the skin I'm in. I knew he was saying, he wasn't saying I am her. He was probably saying I am bullied. And sure enough, a few minutes later, he said, well, I was bullied and then I started bullying. He said, and then I learned that that wasn't the way to solve my problems. We don't always think that Black boys will open up and share,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And give you information and have solutions to their own problems, but they will. And so often I'll go to schools and the teachers will point to somebody and say, that kid over there, you know what? He never likes to read or he never answers any questions. And he's been throwing his hand up the whole time. And confessions sometimes around my books where you have students popping up, if you're talking about bullying or whatever, popping up and saying, yeah, I was bullied or I was a bully or this is happening to me. I have a book when I think I said it was called You Don't Even Know Me, a collection of short stories about boys. And it's one boy is getting married and he's 16, right? Another boy is talking about falling in love. Another boy is talking about getting even. Another boy is being molested. A teacher had that using that book in her class. And she said she gets a letter from a young Black guy that says, I'm being molested. And so the thing about books and novels is that they can open up a whole world and give teachers and adults a window and into young people, but also give young people a window and to say, hey, I'm not alone. And that doesn't always mean something bad is happening to you. Maybe you are the nice boy. Maybe you are the 18-year-old that's never been kissed and you're never maybe going to tell anybody, right? So and so I think we have to believe differently for them.
Yeah.
We have to expect differently for them. And we have to get books into their hands. There's so many more books about African American boys and girls than ever before. Do we need more for Black boys? Yes. But there are plenty out there. You know what I mean? There are plenty out there. Check out your local bookstore. Check out the family I'm in. Check out Bang. There are a lot of books out there.
Yeah. And unfortunately, your book, or I'd actually like to get your perspective on this. Your books, some of them have appeared on some of these book ban lists. And in spite of the fact that books can as you said, that window for students and for educators, the reality is many people in this country don't want that. They want a curtain over that window. They don't want to have conversations where there's discussion of topics like molestation. They don't want to have conversations where people are grappling with the realities of living in a world where diversity is no longer valued, where prejudice is, they don't want those sorts of conversations. How have you been faring with regards to these book bans, and what is it that you think, what do you think that parents and educators should be doing? Because the book bans aren't going away. We have some guests who are going to be joining us in the next couple of weeks to talk more about that, but we're not seeing the book bans go away, although the noise and the media circus around them has died down just a bit. How are you navigating that, and what is it that you think parents and educators, people who love to read your books, how should we be responding?
I think, when my father's 98 And he told us all his life, his grandmother told him, read anything, even if it was a comic book. And so I grew up with a guy that went to the eighth grade only, but read three different newspapers every week, cover to cover, when they were that thick. So he knew all the elected officials, he knew all the history of the world and all their background. So I got to see the value of reading. So first of all, we have to believe that reading is valuable. Second of all, go to bookstores, buy the books. If some people will say books are expensive, they are expensive, but going to the Goodwill for a book is not so expensive. Going to a church sale for a 10-cent book that costs somebody $15 or $1 you can get it for are not expensive. So you have to decide, okay, they may be banning books. We don't want them to ban books. It is not probably going away, but I'm going to get those books into the hands of my children, my church. Go to your church and say, hey, can we start a small library? Build a library. A lot of these people have, we have them in our neighborhood, small little with community libraries, right? So they can't stop all of it. And we just have to realize that it's education and books and reading that really help Black people sort of catapult to where we are today. So they
Mm.
don't win unless we let them win.